Welcome back to another episode of TrueNAS Tech Talk. Today we're going to check in on the 2504.1 feedback and the apps IP update, of course, before we start digging into another little preview of 25.10 coming out in the fall and a few more viewer questions. So, Chris, how do you think how's the update been going for the .1 release? It's pretty good so far.
Yeah, I'd say it's a little bit ahead of our expectations. I don't want to use the word phenomenal, but I am. It's in the sense of it's beating even where Electric Eel was this past fall. And we knew the buzz for Electric Eel was huge because that was the Docker shift and everyone was excited for that. But to have Fangtooth be a little bit of a edit at the same point in time is amazing. That's great to see. We are now in the background, deliberating what the .2 point release needs to have and what release date and all that good stuff. There's no real huge pressing issue. We have something we'll talk about with the apps and IPs here in a moment. So there's no immediate urgency to go rush something out the door. So we're going to take some time and try and get everything into the .2 that we feel is necessary, that'll get people into the summer and through to the fall before Goldeye becomes a real thing. One area, though, I do want to mention is we're sensitive to the feedback. We've heard a lot of people's feedback about the troubles they've had with some of the VMs in particular, the experimental VMs in Fangtooth. And we're discussing internally if there's anything more we can do a little bit more immediately for perhaps in the .2 maybe to address a lot of this feedback and provide a little bit more flexible and robust VM behavior quickly without having to wait necessarily for the fall release to bake and be mature. So again, nothing specific to announce yet, just to say, hey, we hear you. We do read the forums. We see the comments on Reddit. We really actually appreciate even more of the feedback when you go click it in the UI and send it, because that's a lot easier for us to track and monitor and kind of aggregate the data as opposed to just sifting through comments on random threads here and there. So please keep the feedback coming, and we're looking forward to the .2 release here, and we'll discuss that here in a future episode on when that's slated to drop.
Yeah, we'll make sure that you get some good advance notice of that .2. I know everybody's always out there mashing the button for the updates. There is a fix if you are still getting that update available notice on your dashboard. Please jump into the known issues, and there's kind of a simple one-liner for it that'll get rid of that, and that way you will know when it actually is .2 waiting for you and not just a cosmetic bug. Mm-hmm. So on the subject of updates, we had the apps IP addressing going live. We did have an initial issue there with a little bit too strict of port validation. So it was actually validating ports across your entire system, and it was preventing people from assigning the same port to a different IP address. So that was, if you were trying to use port 80, port 443 for your proxy or something like that, it was being consumed by the web UI and you couldn't. But I think, Chris, you have some incredibly late breaking news on that.
It literally merged 30 minutes before we started the recording this morning. So it's up in the apps catalog. Actually, we're not going to have to push a TrueNAS update for this, which is the best case scenario. So if you go ahead and basically log into your TrueNAS UI, go to the apps catalog, click refresh, you should see the fix, and you're now able to go ahead and assign port 80 as many times as you want to all the different IP address aliases you have. That's great. Of course, we'd love feedback on that. So if there's any problems or people find other, glitchy validation errors, please let us know right away, and we'll do our best to address it. But it was very annoying. And again, we're apologies that we didn't catch this earlier, but we are glad and grateful the team was able to turn it around so quick. I think from Monday until Friday, we were able to get the fix understood and resolved and pushed live. So again, happy updating. Enjoy playing it with it this weekend, and let us know if you have any other glitches.
Yeah, made for a bit of an exciting week, but gave everybody a good solid focus, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right. So we've got a quick look ahead at 25.10 this fall. There's a lot cooking in that one, Chris. More than just the VMs and experimental status, but that's definitely a big driver.
Absolutely. That's a big one in the background. Obviously, I think we've discussed at length, we have the VMs and Fangtooth today, which have that experimental label. That's a big driver to be able to drop that experimental label and get things to a really solid place for the Goldeye release this fall. A lot of work's happening behind the scenes right now to make that a reality. So if you're somebody who watches repos and stuff, you might see changes here in the near future. Also, another thing that's being very heavily actively worked on is the proper UEFI secure boot support, which is a whole process in and of itself for people who haven't done this or help run a distro. I mean, you need to go get your shim signed by Microsoft, and you got to submit all this paperwork, and you got to do all these things to do it right. But at the end result is you'll be able to load TrueNAS on a modern system with UEFI secure support. The key will be recognized. So you don't have to go and say it's a third-party key and turn off the officially signed ones. And then every stage of the boot process is signed. So from the bootloader to the kernel to even the kernel modules, which is great and an important thing that we want to get right and done in 2025. So it's been a long time coming to get this feature into the product. We're excited to see that. Hopefully that's all going to land on time in the fall. Nudge, nudge, Microsoft. We need our key signed as quick as possible so we can make sure that lands. But that's some really exciting work. Again, it's been on my list for quite a while to go get that knocked out. And then in the background, it's not for this fall, we're already keeping an eye on Debian Trixie. That's kind of the next big thing in Debian land that we have to pay attention to. So that'll come in the Half Moon update next spring. So 2604. And that's, of course, a whole chore in and of itself to pull a whole new Debian version in.
Yeah, that's a whole new base environment, whatever next year's long-term support kernel is going to end up being, whether they choose like a 615 or something, or something newer. They make those decisions. Early. Yeah, they usually make the LTS decisions sometime in the fall, I think.
Yeah. We usually know by October, November timeframe, because you can kind of see it's going to be the release that drops late November. That's what's going to get tagged as LTS. So again, we'll keep an eye on it, and whatever it ends up being, it is.
Yeah, but that's why the fall release, the .10, doesn't usually pick up that new kernel. It's usually it's got to fall in line with that LTS, because we want to be able to have that sort of maintained, guaranteed stream of support.
Absolutely, which isn't bad. I mean, one new kernel a year, that's actually still pretty aggressive as far as being able to get new kernel with new drivers and all that good stuff out. But because it's an LTS, we have an option to go pull in kind of minor updates throughout the year as well. So there have been even some cases where certain drivers that were new had issues, and we just pulled the latest LTS and we were back in business. So it's good stuff, but we're excited. Half Moon is going to shape up to be a very interesting release.
Yeah, and I would rather change a kernel a year than do the Intel thing and have to change my CPU socket every year. So
yeah, absolutely.
I'm still shopping for that AMD setup. I'm hopefully going to get it done, and that'll be sometime before the fall, I believe. All right. Well, hey, so let's talk about some user tips. Something that maybe we haven't mentioned a lot, and we should do a little bit more, is that in our community forums, not only do we have a bunch of great discussions going on, but we also have an awesome resources section. So there's a variety of guides in there, some how-tos, and other great materials on just, doing amazing things on your TrueNAS system.
Yeah, that's kind of a little hidden gem. Matter of fact, it was too hidden because we realized it wasn't showing up in the default categories. You had to go click to look for it. I fixed that this morning, Chris. It now shows up by default, so people can find the resources section easier. But this is a great place. We love to see our community get engaged. Some of those guides come from some of us here at IX, which is kind of cool. And we encourage people, create those guides, keep them maintained. But I will throw a little caution to authors. Please include all the proper and relevant disclaimers on risk or complexity involved with all the different guides you're publishing. You got to remember, all the people who come after, the readers, not everyone has the same skill level or comfort with, say, Linux or even NAS technologies in general. And so we got to kind of just make sure we're telling people what they're in for before they start clicking buttons and copying and pasting things that they may not understand fully. So
yeah. And especially if you're reading those resources, look for those disclaimers. Don't just kind of scroll through to that quick section of code and copy and paste it in. You want to make sure you know what it's going to do, and that this is something you actually want to do to your system.
Yeah, absolutely. And related to this, again, something else we've been a bit remiss in mentioning more often is our docs page. We have docs. That's great. There's a lot of docs. I'm not sure enough people read them at times, but that's the way it goes with documentation. But another thing a lot of people don't realize is our doc system's fully open source up on GitHub. Even our new apps marketplace that we rolled out, same thing, all up on GitHub. It's all Hugo based. It's all markdown. Very easy to add things to. So a lot of folks haven't noticed on any of the docs pages you're on, top right corner, there's literally an edit button. And that's open to you. That's not an oversight like we left something exposed. No, that's intentional. That edit button will take you right to GitHub and help you open up a new pull request where you can submit either changes to the documentation or new resources. If you're on the apps page, that's how you could submit a guide for, hey, I have this cool guide on how to configure, Plex with all these other plugins. Cool, or Jellyfin or whatever the case may be. Open Web UI actually might be an interesting one for running your own AI, Home Assistant, all that good stuff. So those are all just a click away. So if you're already doing the work to make a guide and toss it on the forums, you might get a lot more visibility submitting it to the official documentation, where it'll get put up on TrueNAS.com/docs and it'll look wonderful and it's all pretty and, also be better maintained for the long haul. And again, the turnaround time on that is typically same day business. So there's really not a lot of friction to get something in. So I'd recommend give it a shot if you have some time. If you can do Markdown, it's easy.
Exactly. Markdown's the same thing. If you can write a Reddit post, you can write a doc page.
Absolutely. And so we appreciate that because, again, there are certain concerns and interests and, little tidbits we don't always have the time to sit and write. So again, that's the spirit of open source. If you're able to contribute something that adds value and helps educate your fellow users, like, please feel free, toss it in.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well,
less fantastic.
Less fantastic.
Nintendo Switch news.
Yeah, a little bad news for Chris here.
Chris did not get his official Switch 2 yet, unfortunately.
Oh, dear.
So I'll give you a little random unasked for retailer feedback here in the US. So two of my kids went and pre-ordered their own Switch 2s. They got them from Walmart, which hats off to Walmart. They did an awesome job of understanding the assignment on what a launch day means. Yesterday was the official launch. They had them out for delivery and on our doorstep before 7 a.m. We saw it on the Ring camera. It was like 6:45 a.m. I'm like, whoa. And then they even went the extra mile and threw in a complimentary bag of gamer treats like drinks and chips and stuff, which is like, wow, cool. Good for you, Walmart. 5 out of 5 stars. Me, on the other hand, well, my pre-order was secured at Target. Don't ask, wasn't my first choice. Beggars can't be choosers. I say we were up at midnight mashing the reload button to see which site we could get in and get a pre-order from. That was where I happened to strike gold. Target, though, you guys really could do better. You really didn't understand the point of a pre-order and launch day. Not only no status notifications all week, just a generic preparing to ship. And then on launch day, they don't ship anything till that night from a distribution center 3 states away, which means it could be 48 hours or maybe even not till early next week. And then the irony, just to rub salt in the wound, is the local Target store down the street, all of 3 miles from my house, had all their units on the shelves ready to go opening that morning. I literally could have just driven down the street on the way into work and picked it up. But oh no, of course you can't do that if you pre-order because it's already in the queue. You've already paid. It's being shipped. You can't just show up and pick something up in store. How crazy is that? Come on, Target. You got to do better. 0 out of 5 stars.
Now, if Target's 0 to 5 stars, we're going to have to find some new integers to assign here for someone like poor GameStop, where apparently there was, I won't name the location because apparently people got mad about that, but there was a single location where they were stapling the receipts for pre-order to the front of the box. And for some reason, the design of the Switch 2 box has the screen of that poor Switch 2 directly facing outward with just a couple layers of cardboard protecting it. And looks like these GameStop employees decided to use kind of, that packaging, that heavy duty shipping stapler. So yes, they did in fact poke holes in about 100 plus people's pre-ordered Nintendo Switch 2s.
Oh, that's frustrating. That's 5 out of 5 poo emojis. That's the scale for that.
Yeah, I was going to say that's like a -2 out of 5 for the 2 puncture holes in the screen. Just that's an unfortunate scenario. And I mean, certainly it's kind of, the first world problem where you're complaining that, your pre-ordered video game console is not working out for you. But it's kind of one of those things. It's a nuisance. And you're going, I really hope I'll be able to get this back before I have to wait like a 3-month queue for a restock.
Yeah, for a repair and restock and all that. Man, what a pain. Anyway, like I said, enough whining about my first world problems here, but I just thought since people were curious what's going on, that was my experience. So maybe I get lucky. It shows up Saturday. Maybe it's next week, whatever. We'll see.
Yeah, definitely do not tag Chris on Twitter with a picture of you holding your Switch 2 in a mocking manner. Don't do that.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get into some questions. Let's get into some serious stuff here.
Absolutely. So go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. Well, I'll take it here. So first up, we got Patrick. He said, I have not yet upgraded to Fangtooth, still an electric eel, because I like the ability to take snapshots of virtual machines before doing something risky to them. Yeah, totally understood. Do you know if there are plans to add snapshot functionality to instances in a future version of TrueNAS, such as Goldeye? So yes, that's one of the things we're looking at is going to be required to get rid of that experimental label, snapshots, backup, being able to do all those things that you just naturally want to be able to do on an instance or a VM for that matter. So that's definitely on our radar. It's in the queue. Again, there's a lot of churn in that area now and a lot of work going on. Keep an eye on what's going to land in Goldeye here in the near future, and hopefully that feature makes it in.
All right. Looking at the next one here, we have Adam who writes and he says, hi, thanks for the great podcast. I've learned quite a bit listening every Friday. Well, we're happy to have you here, Adam. I'm coming from the HPC world where I've been using GPFS for years. So the question I have is if there's a way to set up a policy where hot data could be on, SSD, NVMe drives, and cold data automatically gets moved to larger and slower hard drives, and conversely the other way. So he's looking at, data tiering. He's looked at the log and the L2ARC devices, but he says, I don't think those quite fit. Is there an automated way to move things around? Because, some of this intelligence does exist in ZFS to tell you, what data you're hitting, how frequently, and how recently you've hit it. And, as an aside, he says, what would you do with a pool if you had both SSDs and hard drives? How would that handle it in ZFS? So,
yeah. Well, I'll just address the file tiering part. So first of all, ZFS doesn't have this capability yet. It's high on our list of wants. So definitely it would be something we're very interested in seeing if we could bring to the product at some point, but it's got to land in upstream OpenZFS first. So you keep an eye on that repo. And as you start seeing signs of file tiering arrive, that's when it's time to start getting excited. So we could start looking at when that'll land in TrueNAS.
Yeah, I was going to say, I noticed you said it doesn't have tiering yet.
Yeah, it doesn't have tiering yet. It's one of those things at some point it's natural that ZFS would have to grow.
It's like one of those asks, much like the RAID Z expansion. They're saying, we don't have that. And then it became, we don't have that yet.
Yeah. No, it's one of those things. There's certain features you can look at ZFS and say it's only a matter of time before that gets added. So again, whether that's 2 years, 3 years, we'll see. But it needs to get added at some point. But it's got to go in the file system proper first to do it the right way.
Exactly. It's if it was something we were putting into our own, then it would be a case of, well, we're going to promote that back upstream because again, it's open source, and that's what you do in this kind of environment. So
how would you recommend he handle his SSDs and HDs?
Definitely don't just mix them all in the same pool, because that's really going to confuse the write allocator, because then you're mixing, solid state drives with hard drives in the same VDEVs. You're basically going to lose all the advantages of the lower latency and the non-mechanical nature of a solid state drive. It's not able to, separate them out and handle them differently down at that level. If you wanted to use solid state drives and hard drives and you want to make sort of this, pseudo tiering behavior, make two separate pools, and you'll need to control it with whether it's scheduled rsync scripts, maybe even something like a sync thing set up if you need a full synchronization. But it's not going to be your traditional, tiering solution where you can use a small chunk of SSD to accelerate the bigger chunk of hard drive there. You can certainly look at the log and the L2ARC. L2ARC can be pretty useful, especially now that by default, it is persistent in scale. So at least on the read side, you're going to get that sort of data tiering behavior. You're just not going to get what people are looking for, of that sort of caching behavior where you can write everything to a solid state drive and then later on spool it down to your spinning disk. So that part's not there, but again, it's not there yet. It does make an awful lot of sense. Makes an awful lot of sense for a file system. Just has to make sure that it can be done safely.
Safely, and it's important to do it at the file system layer so it's transparent to the upstream consumers that sit on top of the file system. So your SMBs and NFS and other services, they need to not be bothered with the details of, where did that file go? Right? It's tough to go and reprogram all of those consumers to understand the idea that files can be moving between different tiers and classes. So doing it at the file system layer is the right place, because you can kind of do that transparently in the background. Let ZFS have the headache of deciding when and where to relocate files to. And then your upstream, again, services just say, give me my file. I don't need to know any more than that. And they don't need any changes in behavior.
Exactly. Well, let's jump on to the next one here from KD Puvati here. He says, hello, C and C of T3. It's actually C and K, but thank you. He says, first off, that's all right. It's Chris's. First off, I'm a huge fan of the show. Well, thank you. We're glad to have you again. It's become a regular part of my weekend routine, listening to each episode while I drive to get groceries. He says he appreciates the time and effort we put into creating this content amidst our busy schedules, and keep up the great work. Well, again, we appreciate that. It. Yeah. So he recently heard about something upcoming, which is ZFS AnyRaid by Eshtec, which they are integrating into HexOS. This is a system based on TrueNAS. So for home lab users like myself, it's pretty exciting news. I know you've mentioned before that IX Systems is invested in Eshtec, which makes it even more interesting. With respect to TrueNAS, what are your thoughts on this? Do you see any potential for this feature to be implemented into TrueNAS in the future? I understand it's still very early stages, but I'd be interested in hearing your initial perspectives on this. So Chris, let's share a few thoughts on AnyRaid here. Certainly,
we'll spill a little bit of the beans on this. So yeah, of course we're aware of it. We actually helped do some of the initial scoping and pre-design work on just making sure this all looked good, because obviously we're keen on seeing this land. Of course, Clara Systems is doing the initial implementation. Eshtec's working and has announced all that. You kind of hinted at it here in your comment. Eshtec HexOS is actually based on TrueNAS. So that kind of naturally implies it's going to come into TrueNAS first, and it will. So what's going to happen is, of course, the work's going to go on upstream into OpenZFS first. So you'll start seeing AnyRaid support land in the OpenZFS repo. And then the next tag version of ZFS, that will get pulled into TrueNAS and HexOS automatically. And of course, we're going to be super excited to see that come in. Doesn't make a lot of sense for a lot of the more enterprisey systems, but for small home lab systems, it is pretty attractive being able to have kind of mix size drives and mix and match. And it doesn't have the same restrictions you have with more of your RAID Z layouts. So it's exciting. I don't want to get into too many details on it, because I think we actually probably will do an episode on this in the future and just go into the nitty gritty on what changes, what does this new RAID layout kind of mean for ZFS, and how you might build smaller systems where you don't have access to all the drives of the same sizes and characteristics. So it's a very cool feature. We're excited to see it land, but it's still early stages. As you mentioned, we're going to have to wait a little bit for it to bake upstream first.
Exactly. And I've seen people try to do this in the past, where they'll like slice up a 3 terabyte or a 2 terabyte drive into single terabyte slices each and assign them around. Basically, because they're bolting it on after the fact, it always really had some strange performance edge cases, and they always had to be really careful with the redundancy. So that's all the stuff that we have to sort of consider when we're scoping this out and building it in an upstream level. So it's actually integrated with ZFS at a baser level, where ZFS will understand that redundancy, and you don't have to do all of that sort of manual calculation work yourself. All right, our last question of the day here comes in from Jason, and he talks about he says, I have a question about adding those special VDEVs and adding them only for small file sizes, or moreover, he says, whether or not a special VDEV is the right place to do this sort of small file size allocation, given that it's already got a heavy load and has critical redundancy requirements for metadata. So in this case, we're talking about the special VDEVs, those ones that were added back, was it OpenZFS 2?
It's been a while now, yeah.
No, sorry, it was 0.8, actually. It was before the 1.0 release of OpenZFS where that was added. But those are, where people will add a small solid-state drive to accelerate the metadata rather than their actual data that's being stored on usually larger spinning disks. So got some
Which
thoughts
was
on this
important
one.
because, especially back in the early days when that landed, SSDs were still crazy expensive and crazy small. So you couldn't use them for primary data storage, but you had these slow spinning disks and you needed some way to accelerate at least the metadata, so you could go get that listing of a directory that has 1 million files and it doesn't take 20 minutes kind of thing, which could be very painful. Would you use it for small files? Yeah, that's definitely one thing you can do these days. Again, the wisdom of that depends entirely, I think, on your setup and use case, on whether you are going to be overloading that small special VDEV. Do you have any particular tips or pointers you may want to offer him here? I know we don't have a lot of details on his use case.
Yeah, the challenge where sometimes I saw this getting used, and one of the particular places that it was almost intended for, I think, was to accelerate small files on a D-RAID or a really wide RAID Z2. So where they said, they have this sort of mix of files, and they wanted to have, you'd get your large files with your sequential IO that would live on your spinning disks and generally be serviced pretty well from that. But then when you got these tiny files that were like 4K, 16K, this was typically when you were doing like if you had media files that had the little tiny sidecars of XML or metadata, but it was small enough that it was below a particular threshold you could set. So in the case where you have like multiple 100 megabyte or gigabyte sized media files, but then you had these little XML or thumbnail sidecars, as little kilobyte sized files, people would attach a pretty sizable special VDEV just to have that there to hold and be able to catch everything. And they'd set the special small blocks threshold to like the 128K and set their default record size on the data set to 1 meg. So basically every file larger than 128K would go to the spinning disks, be serviced generally pretty well from them. Everything smaller than that line would land on the solid state drives. But again, just those couple words of note on special VDEVs. Again, They have to be kept redundant. So if you can't just add a single SSD to a RAID Z2 and think, okay, I still have 2-drive redundancy. Well, you have 2-drive redundancy among your spinning disks. You only have single drive redundancy among your solid state drives. You want to have at least a mirror there, maybe even a 3 mirror, especially if you're doing a lot of critical data work on there. And the other challenge is if you do have a RAID Z2 for data, once you've added a special VDEV, you cannot remove it. Those same VDEV removal rules apply for special VDEVs as they do for regular data ones. If there is a RAID Z2 anywhere in your data VDEVs, you cannot remove any VDEVs at all. That includes your specials. So if you're going to try it out and you want to see if you get benefits, probably step one is make sure you have good backups first. And if you are going to test it out, at least test it out with mirrors. That way okay, I have mirrors, I have some redundancy if one of these drives dies. And if you say, hey, I've got to make this a permanent fixture, you can add drives to a VDEV. So you could say, hey, I have 2 of these here. I can add a larger drive as a third one, drop one of these other 2, and then add a large drive again, and then you'll have you'll be able to grow your special VDEV in that manner.
Yeah, you got to be careful always of putting in 2 drives of the same type, exact same manufacturer at the same time, because they might potentially both wear out around the exact same time as well. So be proactive about thinking about how I'm going to replace these, and if you can stagger them, that's even better, just to make sure you're not hitting that same point of, oh, we're both getting exhausted right at the same moment.
Yeah,
because as a mirror, they're doing all the same things.
Exactly, and that's generally how it goes with SSDs. They both have the same amount of write longevity in them usually, and if you're doing the same writes, they're going to wear out at the same time. So stagger them out, like Chris says. If they're designed to last for 5 years, well, don't wait until 5 years to replace them both. Take a look at one of them and say, I'm going to replace this at year 4. Then you have some time before you have to look at replacing the other one.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Great. Good question, Jason. Good question.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody very much for your questions today and for being with us for the week as we give you these little updates and sneak peeks into the future of ZFS. One more reminder, if you are looking to do your migrations or updates of your apps, please make sure you get on that 24.10.2.2 or later. We did see a few posts about this that pretty quickly resolved themselves when the person said, why aren't my apps updating? Oh, that looks like there's an update for TrueNAS. They hit the button and they said everything works now. So please make sure you do that. Get your updates into the latest version of Electric Eel, or if you're on Fangtooth already, you're all set. And then, as Chris mentioned at the beginning of the show, just if you're having issues with assigning IPs and ports and they don't want to share, go into the catalog, refresh that catalog. It should hopefully be there by the time this show is uploaded, and then you'll be able to assign your IPs and ports as you see fit.
Yep. And as always, thanks for tuning into the T3 podcast. Make sure you send more of those questions over to t3@truenas.com. Hey, we knocked out a chunk of them today. I think we got 4 in, and there's still a few more in the backlog, so keep them coming. We appreciate that. Drop us a message in the comments section. Don't forget to go like the video, subscribe. Keep listening to T3 to stay on top of all the latest TrueNAS and tech topics. Have an awesome weekend, everyone.